Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and today is part one where we're talking about employment. Basically, being an employer in your own business. This is actually a very complex topic, so I'm going to be doing it in two parts. Here in part one, I'm going to be talking about types of employees, kind of some rules around them, how to kind of get and keep your employees. In part two, I'm actually going to talk about the entire hiring and firing process. By the way, if you hear the sound of toes tapping, it's just my dog. She can't figure out what she wants to do right now. Her name is Bailey. She's very cute. So the first thing to understand about employment is employment laws are different depending on what state you're in. Minimum wage is different depending on what state you're in. And the rules regarding lunches, breaks, and the time spent on versus off the clock are different in every state. So please understand that everything I'm going to say is going to be bent towards California laws and may or may not apply in your state. So just for safety's sake, you should always check with your own state's rules and regulations before hiring anybody, because you need to make sure you're doing it correctly. So when do you hire someone? Right when you first start, do you have to hire someone from the get-go in order to be able to hire people in the future? No. In California, you can choose to hire employees later. You need what's called a state EIN. So when you get your business, you get your EIN, which is your tax ID number for paying federal taxes. You also need one probably for your state, at least you do in California, in order to be able to pay taxes for employees. So you don't need to hire anybody until you need help in actually hiring somebody. Now, there are three different kinds of employees. First are actual employees. These are people that are technically, legally part of your company. So if you want to control what your employee does, when they work, and how they work, you need them to be employees. This is a higher cost to you because you have to pay things like their taxes. At least in California, for every certain number of hours they work, they get 1 hour of sick time. You have to pay for their Social Security benefit and all of these other things. So having an employee is the expensive one, but you actually have control over what they do and how they do it. So it is definitely a cost-benefit analysis. The next option is independent contractor. So basically, you agree with them on a rate and you just pay them that rate. You don't take out any taxes or anything. They have to keep track of that. The problem is you don't get to control anything about their work. They control their schedule. They control how they do the work. All you can do is give them deadlines, and they have to do the thing by the deadline. If you don't mind not having control, this is fine. Then there's outsourcing. These are generally not employees. So this is like hiring a company to do your payroll for you. This is hiring a tax accountant to do a specific service for you. You pay for the job. So you're just paying a company or a person who operates on their own for the job. This is different than an independent contractor who works for you under the umbrella of your company, but does their own thing. So who do you typically hire as employees? Who do you typically hire as independent contractors? And what things do you typically outsource? So typically in a crafty business, if you're having somebody manufacture your products or having a personal office assistant, these are typically employee positions because you want them to do the thing you want them to do the way you want them to do it. Typically for independent contractors, you'll have like your marketing specialists. So people who do your online social media presence and who do your marketing and SEO and keywords and stuff like that. You usually hire them to do a job. It doesn't really matter when in the week they do it, as long as they get it back to you by Friday. The people you typically outsource are like your accounting, taxes, lawyers, and payroll. You don't necessarily have to hire for every single position. You really need to kind of decide what works best for the job you want somebody to do. And here's the thing, you don't want to hire too soon. You want to hire the minute you need somebody, the minute the work is too much. You also want to hire somebody doing the thing you kind of like to do the least, that you need the most help with. For example, in my tutoring company, I suck at payroll. You will probably notice that there's very little on payroll in here. That's because I don't know it. I outsourced that. I hired a company to do that for me. All I had to do was keep track of hours and wages, and because I'm in California, mileage, and I turned all of that over to the payroll company, and they told me how much I had to pay them so that way they could pay everybody for me, all the taxes and everything. They were also an accountancy firm, so they did my payroll taxes for me as well. So I didn't have to worry about any of that. Now, employees have some very specific things that apply when you are hiring them. This really goes for anything anyway, good general practice. The big thing to remember is equal employment rules. Unless there's a BFOQ, a bona fide occupational qualification that isn't being met, you cannot discriminate based on a huge list. Now, I've got a very short list, but you can actually look this up on Google for the full paragraph of protected classes. But we've got age, race, sex, sexual orientation, disability, pregnancy, just to name a few. The list is huge. Unless you literally need them to do something. So, for example, if you need somebody to help with manufacturing, you need them to be able to move around your studio effectively and quickly. You need them to be able to lift your 45-pound blocks of wax. And you need them to be able to reach things on shelves that aren't just low. Because that's literally all the space you have. You have to use vertical space. These are actually bona fide occupational qualifications. Somebody in a wheelchair will legitimately have difficulty with that. But if you're able to accommodate somebody by lowering things into their reach, making sure that there are large enough paths for the wheelchairs to be able to access, and you're totally cool with them putting their stuff on their laps. I mean, you can totally accommodate, people with a wide range of disabilities. So just being aware what things are a bona fide occupational qualifications and what things you can reasonably accommodate for. They really don't take very much. Because, if you do discriminate based on that, you can get sued. I really had to be careful of this with my tutoring company because we had a vast majority of applicants who were female, and tutoring is a female-dominant group. A lot of parents of daughters really do prefer a woman to tutor their children. Women are seen as safe in our society. So I had to make sure to hire men, which could easily turn into its own kind of discrimination. When I worked in coffee, I was an employee for a coffee company. My boss basically hired any man who applied and showed up to the interview because he needed guys for the equal employment opportunity. He could be much more picky with the women, which is kind of its own sexism because it's a women-dominated force. And something to also be careful of in a lot of women-dominated industries, such as candle making, soap making, knit and crochet, fiber arts. Something that often happens, and it isn't always paid attention to, is that men can wind up climbing the corporate ladder a lot faster than women do, just because there's a lot more competition between women. So this actually also happened in the coffee shop, is that most men got promoted to supervisor within a semester because we worked on a school campus, so everything was kind of based on the semester system. I was there for 3.5 years before I got promoted to supervisor. And I was only supervisor for one semester before the company changed hands and everybody who wasn't a student at the school got laid off. But the entire management team, I'll describe it to you in terms of gender equality because it was not equally gendered. Our mean manager, who was technically a regional manager because he managed all 5 locations on campus, he was male. The 3 assistant managers were all male. Half of the supervisors were male. Only 1 or 2 males were left as low employees, basic new hire employees. They did promote from within. So it took me 3.5 years to become supervisor. This guy got hired a year after me, was promoted to supervisor within 2 months of being hired. And he sucked. He was just not very good as a supervisor. And here's the thing, when I finally became supervisor, because I'd been unofficially acting as a supervisor for quite a long time, I learned the supervisory job and was good to be independent on it in 3 weeks. Most people took 6 weeks. So please make sure when you promote somebody, do it based on how well they work. Do not keep somebody who is super good in a low position because you want them really good in a low position. That is a great way to not keep them. We'll talk more about this later, but realize that pay gets you the good employees, but how you treat them and how well you fulfill their needs will determine if you keep them. And somebody who is very valuable in a low position might be even more valuable to you in a higher position. There is also something to be considered with at-will hiring. There's 2 types of employees. There's at-will employees and there's contract employees. And even contract employees still have to adhere to a lot of the rules of at-will employees. It's just that usually you have a contract that agrees on a lot of the finer details, things like salary versus an hourly wage, and how overtime is handled, how much overtime is allowed, how much work is expected of them, exactly what their duties are, those kinds of things. At-will employees is a lot more flexible, and I don't know if every state has this distinction. California definitely does. In California, an at-will employee means you can fire them for any reason, and they can quit for any reason. There's no terms for how long they're going to be employed with you. So anybody can quit or be fired for any reason. Just make sure if you're firing somebody, it is for a bona fide occupational qualification, a BFOQ. Because if you fire them for any reason besides them sucking at their job or doing something against the clearly laid out rules, they can sue you. But at-will employees are usually allotted a certain amount of time. So in California, if your employee is going to be working in their shift for 3 hours, 3 hours and 1 minute, they need to take a 15-minute break. It might be 10 minutes, I don't remember. Look it up. This is subject to change over time. At 5 hours and 1 minute, they need to have a 30-minute lunch. At the 6.5-hour mark, I believe, they need to take their second 15-minute break. And if they work 1 minute over 8 hours, they qualify for overtime. And overtime should be time and a half. And in the state of California, if you are having them work on a national holiday, they get paid double time. So that is whatever wage they get paid times 2. You can fire somebody seasonally. That's not called firing, that's called laying them off. Just be aware that when you do this, they are very likely going to qualify for unemployment. At least in California, when you pay payroll, there is an additional amount of money that is set aside with payroll so that you can pay for unemployment when and if it comes up. Like with my tutoring business, tutoring dies in the summer. Many of my employees, if they didn't just find another job over the summer, they did apply for unemployment. And the previous employer pays for that. So be aware and plan. This is also why a lot of people don't necessarily fire employees that are troublesome. And I never actually fired anybody in my job. A lot of people quit when it was clear that it wasn't a really good fit because going to students' houses, being your own boss, it does require a certain mentality that not everybody had. So a lot of my employees just quit when it wasn't beneficial to them anymore. But also, if somebody's having a lot of problems, it is a common practice. It is not the most ethical thing to do, but it is a common practice to just stop giving them work. Stop giving them hours. It's kind of a way of quietly firing them without actually going through the paperwork of firing them and taking them off of your books. And if you're not under contract, that they definitely get a certain amount of work at any given time. This is something that is commonly done to get undesirable employees to quit because they're not working there anyway. So they'll give you the 2 weeks notice, find another job, and just be done. You do have to be aware that some people don't catch on to what you're doing and will feel like you're stringing them along. Just be aware this is also highly unethical. My personal belief is that if they don't quit because they realize it's not working, do the thing and sit them down and have that hard conversation of, I don't think this is working, and just give them 2 weeks notice. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. Happy crafting. Bye.